Creigh Kelley to talk about what COVID mitigation looks like for your events.
All right, Lonnie, thank you very much. That last question made me think about how we are social animals. Everything we're doing in mitigation seems almost anti-social. And yet we as runners, I haven't run with my 5:30 a.m. running group, since March. And I miss it. I miss it. And I saw it at the Rudolph Ramble on Sunday that people had this collegiality, this atmosphere of such a positive atmosphere. I will tell you that one thing before I get into the planning component, anecdotally, I did an interview with Eddie Lyons, this guy that's 90 years old. And I asked him, what do you think about all the restrictions and so on? And he was ready to quip that in 1931, his parents gave him a nickel to go buy a loaf of bread. And he brought the loaf of bread home, and they shared half the loaf. And when his parents weren't watching, he ate the other half. And he said he got in an immense amount of trouble. He said, the restrictions that we are placing on ourselves today have no comparative basis to the Depression or what went on in the Second World War. So I found it a little refreshing, and I also found refreshing that it was he loved the social component to Sunday's event. So good afternoon to those of you that are on the East Coast and Midwest, and good morning to the rest of you. And I see there's a lot of people here. In March, we sensed that we were getting this impact from COVID-19, and none of us understood it. Like Lonnie said, we thought it was going to be, maybe we'd be okay in May or June, and we all know where we are now. So one of the things that we learned quickly, and I'll speak for Andrea Dowdy in this particular situation, the CEO of the Colfax Marathon Weekend, we started talking to everyone around the world, to the Berlin Marathon, to the Boston Marathon, to Chicago, to whoever was being severely impacted by COVID-19, saying, what are you doing in your community? How are you managing this? And Lonnie and I had numerous discussions about how we were going to move around this and still be able to survive as events and as businesses and as charities, because Lonnie has the Fetal Health Foundation, and I have my own little charity, the Kipturi Primary School Foundation in Kenya. And we knew that we were going to be struggling to get people to want to continue to contribute to our causes. And so we immediately decided that we were going to offer ourselves up as experts to our community government to see if we could create guidelines that would not only be approved by epidemiologists, because ultimately that's where they go to get their approval. It's to their departments of health and environment in their local community or in the state. And they don't know really, unless they happen to be a runner that actually puts on events, which they aren't. They need us. They need our input. And rather than fight with them, we chose to collaborate with them. And so that was the first thing. And in most communities now across the country and around the world, they have dialed this in. And so Lonnie and others that we talk with collaborated to write these guidelines. And a year ago, I was sitting here talking to you about how to make your events safe. strategically in terms of terrorist acts and vehicle intrusion and barricades and all these other things. Well, what we did, we went and we did our homework and we figured it out. And Lonnie was the guinea pig, because we actually hired HAL Sports and Lonnie to put on our event for the Colfax Marathon weekend, but actually we did an event, Welcome Back Running in Denver, and we did it in October. But he was the first one that took our guidelines and put them into action. And honest to God, for that period of time, I was worried. Not worried that Lonnie wouldn't do it right, but worried that the participants wouldn't participate properly, or they would be angry with us, or they wouldn't even show up. Well, it sold out within 2 or 2.5 days to our maximum level of 700. And yes, some of those dropped into an alternate universe and did it at home, or did it, I guess, this virtual thing, which I agree with Lonnie, I don't like the word at all. And but the takeaway from it was that all these things that we wrote into our COVID-19 mitigation plan were good. They actually worked. And so let me share with you some of the things that I think are critical. Number one, and Lonnie said it, you cannot do this. Just with pure volunteers. This is my strong opinion. I'm sticking to it. You need to have staff that are well-trained, well-versed, understand the social contract, because before you can have an event, you have to know clearly, and I thought Michelle's comments were really good. Everything has to be crystal clear. You can't kind of wing it in these situations. So we decided that it should be minimally volunteer-based. It should be maximum staff-based. And because I had an event management company for decades, I understood the value of volunteers. We depended on them. We gave them all kinds of jobs, and they could show up on event morning. We'd give them a shirt and say, you are now part of our group that will manage this event. Well, you can't do that anymore because you don't know what you're going to get. So part of your planning is to create, just as you would have an operations plan. And yes, I understand that an event of 200 or 300 people doesn't seem necessary to have a real operations plan. You just, as Dave McGilvery, the race director of Boston, used to say, just draw a line in the dirt and, say go, and we'll figure it out. We can't do that anymore. So we, and that is Lonnie, myself, I'll give Derek Griffith, I don't know if he's on this call or not, great credit, because we all collaborated and we worked really hard to come up with appropriate guidelines that weren't just parochial in nature. They could be across the board, across the country. And we also created the Colorado Running and Walking Events Alliance because we wanted a repository where this information would be available to you as an event, as an organizer, or as a government entity. So it was easy to find out what's the latest guidance. And so that exists, and maybe Lonnie or Michelle can post that link at some point so you can look at it, because it's all there, and the guidelines are all there. And many of you on this call probably have your fingerprints on it because we had to go and ask you what will make sense for you. So writing a COVID-19 mitigation plan was one of the components that we said was important. Well, now it's a requirement in our community anyway. It's a requirement, but we've cracked the code. We already know what it looks like, and we can share that with you. The second thing that we learned was how are we going to get these people to want to come to the event? Well, the first thing you have to do is make it safe and tell them what you're doing to make it safe and require them to sign and agree to a social contract. And I noticed in Lonnie's, in his event this past Sunday, leading up to it, not only did the participant have to adhere to a social contract, but so did his staff. Everybody that worked for him had to adhere to the same social contract. Not ambiguous, unambiguous, very clear. But you're not going to have to do all the head scratching because it's already done. If you retain a good management company or your charity has figured it out, there's samples of this, and there's no shortcuts. You don't want to ever have a shortcut, because you don't want to have anybody come to the event and say, well, you said you were going to have a socially distance at the start, but you really didn't do it. You kind of just let us show up. Well, I'm going to use the Rudolph Ramble as just a simple example. And this doesn't cost a lot of money. Some chalk, to mark spaces on the ground, to have some cones to separate people. And one of the things that you'll learn, you'll relearn because you sort of know it implicitly, runners are smart people. Walkers at events, these are smart people. They understand how important this is. So when Lonnie, as the MC of the event, the announcer at the start, tells them, look down, you'll see a mark on the ground. I watched all the people in this group of 75 in the first wave group. They looked down and then they stood on the X. It wasn't adversarial compliance. It was agreeable compliance. And I thought that was awesome. And then when he asked them, do you understand what I'm telling you? Raise your hand if you do. It's like we're in school, they're all raising their hands. And I thought it was just so refreshing and useful to know how important it is to be clear in your instructions. And that tells me something that I said in the beginning. And somebody said, well, Creigh, you're an event announcer as well, so you're just being self-serving. When you said the most important person that morning at the event is the announcer, the person that's on the microphone, because whatever they tell you to do, you're going to probably have that runner or walker do. And so that person has to know inside and out the entire event operations plan. And they also have to know what the social contract says. And yes, they got to be like Lonnie and fun and upbeat and, tell jokes. And some of his jokes are just terrible, but some of them are pretty good. And he makes his operations plans interesting, because I had to read it, because he had me helping a little bit at the finish line, talking to the athletes as they finished. But he puts witticisms and jokes and cartoons and things in his operations plan. It makes it more agreeable to read, because you have to have your staff read these things. Otherwise, what good are they? So these plans take time to put together. And last year we were talking about your safety plan, and it takes time to put it together. So in your community, whether I was talking last night, I got a late night phone call from the race director of the Cherry Blossom 10 miler in DC. And he was joined by his deputy race director and the race director of another event. And we were just chatting as colleagues. And I thought what Lonnie said was very useful. I said, well, hey, in my self-interest, is Cherry Blossom going to happen in March or April? And their answer was, wait and see. And because we don't know. And so these plans, you think, well, I can just put these mitigation plans on the shelf because 2021, it's bright and hopeful. And no, you have to plan for the worst and hope for the best and settle for something maybe in between. I'm fully supportive of the idea that these event managers have to be so plugged in to this. And that's why HAL Sports does what it does. That's why Shannon Cook and her company do what they do. Derek Griffith does what he does. This is in our local community. But if you think for 1 minute that this isn't happening properly in other communities, I know it is. Mike Bone from Spectrum Sports created with some other people his own California Running and Walking Event Alliance. I don't know the name of it exactly, but it's along the same terms. A repository where all the information can sit. So anybody, we're not parochial in nature. We have to help others because we have to help this entire sport of distance running and walking events and stair climbs and triathlons. They have to get it right because the moment one of us gets it wrong, that will be the end of a great ambitious project. And we don't want that to end. We want you to have an amazing event. I think stair climbs, and Lonnie could probably talk about this for a long time, have some of the most unique challenges because of a relatively confined space. And how do you do that? How do you manage that? You want the smartest people in the room helping guide you into making these things occur. And in the outdoor environment, we also know that we can do this successfully and keep people safe. I know people were sort of laughing at me because they like to laugh at me, but they were laughing at me because I was wearing a mask and a face shield, and I would take the microphone and bump it into the face shield. You know, it's just not a natural thing. But once we get used to wearing a mask, not necessarily when we're running, but when we're around other people in close proximity, it's an automatic response to pull up your face mask or your face covering. I know it is in my case. It's a very strange feeling that I'm actually doing this naturally now. It wasn't natural in the beginning, but it sure is now. And so when you write these plans, you have to think of the safety of the person participating first. And the way you do that is by being safe yourself first and actually having a plan that works first. That way you can have a fun and safe event. And I know in the months going forward, as the vaccines are rolled out, we're going to be struggling to bring our events online. And if you're not compliant now, you'll never have the opportunity to do your event later on because nobody will trust you. But what runners will do and walkers will do, if you do it right now, and they will absolutely come back in droves. I saw it. I talked to so many runners right now and events around the country, and I continue to have those dialogues. They are so anxious to come back online, but runners and walkers are willing to do things if you have written an effective COVID-19 mitigation plan and you have been in touch with your government entities. Don't think for a moment that they're not watching. And there are new rules in place that if you told me that this would be what we would be doing a year later, I would have said you'd be insane. Why would we bother? But I did do the math. So the math suggests that you can do a small charity event safely with the proper management and still make money. Some things will cost a little bit more, but some things actually don't. and it was surprising. In my first rendition of the guidelines that were imposed, I was suggesting you had to have hard fencing and hundreds of feet of it. And I quickly understood that that wasn't a feasible or practical way to do it. You could still separate people effectively without all this intrusive equipment. And once we realized that, you could you could simplify it so quickly to be effective. Some of the things that you don't have to really bother with anymore are digital clocks at the start and finish, unless you want to do like Michelle and Lonnie do, just to show the time of day, because it doesn't matter. And so I think, in summary, I don't want to keep up all the time left from questions, but I will tell you that the number one thing is to have a written, clear, and understandable plan. And the way you find out if it's understandable is you task your friends that are runners and walkers. We all have friends that don't put on events, and say, okay, I'm going to read this. Does this make any sense to you? What's confusing to you? And then it'll help you manage the message properly. With that, I'm just going to stop and see if there's any questions and open it up for that.
So Creigh, what I want to do is actually have some of the mitigation plans I was going to throw up on the screen so people could kind of see them.
Great. Good.
And a couple things I wanted to add to what you said to make the importance of that. Again, HAL Sports and us, we have written quite a few of these. And in fact, at the beginning of November, where we thought we were kind of at the stable level and we were going to move forward in a positive direction and open up even more with the additional surges that took place, we took a big step back, and the restrictions that were coming in would made it almost impossible for us to do an event. So I quickly, after I found a few more gray hairs from that point, spent several days working with Creigh and Andrea from Colfax on our coalition, and I put together all kinds of stats showing how we could increase our capacity, but still keep smaller numbers at the event by showing what we had done with other events and being able to actually map it out statistically and show where anybody was at any given point. Because we went from being able to allowed to have 175 people an hour down to 75 and a cap of around 300 or less because you can't be at the park all day long. So it quickly meant, oh my gosh, we 300 people with the expense and everything like that. We spent money for medals and shirts for 700 people to be there. We're going to be in terrible shape. And again, we wanted to be we were motivated by safety. So if it didn't work out, that it wasn't safe, we weren't going to do it. But Creigh made a very good point about the social contract. We make people during registration agree to it. They have to check a box saying, yes, I realize that this social contract and the social contract, and we will send you examples of these. So all the information we talk about, COVID mitigation plans, the guideline plans that Creigh and Andrea developed, all that, we're going to send you links or actual documents that you can use. And you feel free to use them. We always love if you give us a little credit on it, but not necessary. But more importantly, we're there to help you through this. If you need help writing these plans, we're there to do that or fully write them for you and come up with them.
Lonnie, it occurred to me, and I would encourage all of you in your community, if God forbid, no one has taken the initiative to become the expert in your community, by all means, offer yourselves up or offer our resources up, because there needs to be appropriate guidelines. I know in some states, particularly Florida, people are putting on events incorrectly, and it just reflects badly on the whole industry. And I would encourage you to be collegial with your government. Reach out to them. They probably will welcome your participation in the solution building for this, because when Lonnie mentioned in early November, we were rolling, expecting that we'd be doing events with 1,000 people by this time. Well, we went an absolute headlong reverse. And when that happened, because Lonnie had built his credibility with the government, and we had built together our credibility with the government and showed that we can do this responsibly, it took, I think, it took us 4 days, Lonnie, to get a response from the epidemiology people in the government and in the health department to say, no, they know what they're doing. That's fine. Lonnie's got a handle on this. He can go with 75 people every 30 minutes. We're not going to make him wait an hour. And I don't think he would have gotten that response had he not had this collective, again, being collegial and helpful and cooperative with the government. He never would have gotten that passed.
Yeah, no, that was it was a oh my God moment for me because our event was coming up again or coming up very quickly for our charity side of it. And while it actually affected that charity event, but it was the subsequent events that we wanted to make sure that we could still do. And having that, being able to having that rapport with the Department of Health and our Office of Special Events, knowing that we'd done events safely, knowing that we could show that we were doing them extremely cautiously and safely, and that we were putting safety as a priority, not to just do them to do them, gave us credibility with them that we knew what we were doing, and that we were able to show that we were able to, again, with a 5K, based on the way we had the course design set up and stuff, that we could have people out of there before, most 90% of everybody out of there before the next 75 started. And that was huge.
I was just thinking about Scott and Dave and how their platform, which I really wasn't familiar with until we just were introduced to it this morning, how they get the opportunity to be resident experts too. Yeah, they've got their platform and it's all fine, but now they can offer up their expertise to their clients, whether they're with HAL Sports or whomever, doesn't matter, because now they will have answers to the questions. I was just thinking, Scott and Dave, how ironic it is and valuable it is that you can do that as well. And it's kind of an interesting way our total community of running and walking and triathlon events can be in this moment.
Yeah, definitely. I popped up, I'm sharing my screen to give you guys an idea what a mitigation plan looks for. When Creigh mentioned the social contract, and again, I started to talk about that, not only for your participants, but also you want your vendors, and you want to make it, some of the key things that you'll see in it is that, one is that if they've, the general stuff that we all see, if you've been in contact with anybody with COVID, don't come. If you've been sick, don't come. But the other thing too is ensuring that they know that they need to be compliant with rules and regulations that you have, and that you have the right to remove them from the event if they're not compliant. Now I can tell you, we've probably have, since the end of July to now, we've probably have hosted somewhere in the neighborhood of 3, 4, maybe 5,000 athletes in that time frame. And we have had really zero incidents of anybody being not compliant. Usually there's a quick reminder about a mask, or, you need to keep yourself moving, but everyone has been really gracious. And I expected maybe we'd have a couple people here and there, because there always seems to be those couple people, but really people have been very super gracious, very super supportive and compliant with things. So I know we had somebody that was concerned about that as a client. Are people going to be compliant? Will they follow the rules? And the answer is right now, super majority, yes. But that social contract really is there it gives them an extra layer of comfortability. It gives you something to fall back on. It should be separate of your waiver. When you get people to agree to it, we remind them the week of the event, again, that they agreed to this. Besides during registration, we talk about it at the event. And not only do we provide this to the participants and our staff, but it's also vendors, because vendors, and I'll even tell you some of this isn't necessarily applicable for us in the event organizing thing, but the vendors are very important to make sure they understand too, because a lot of times the vendor that might be coming out, and we don't have a lot of them. We might have a couple of them because again, we social distancing and so forth, but we do have a couple there. But I had an event, and we told them they need to agree to it. And the one person, we did have one incident, this one person did not want to wear a mask. So, it's like, then you're gone. And by the way, you don't get a refund on your money that you paid us to be there. You agreed to comply by these, and I don't care if it was you or the worker that you sent out, you need to make sure they're complying with it, because that one incident, it only takes one person at a park who's a patron or a resident around the park to take a picture of that, send it to the government official or the permitting agency, and you're shut down, period. Or all events are shut down because they see one instance of it, they might go jump to the extreme. So those are important. And one of the things that we've done too is for events that we're doing a smaller part than fully producing it, or we're not consulting as much, we are requiring the event to sign off on an event social contract with us that essentially gives us the right that, and I know it sounds a little scary and harsh, but we're trying to protect ourselves and protect participants, and we're really trying to protect the event. That if they don't follow the mitigation guidelines at a bare minimum of what's required by their state and county, and we get there and they're not doing those things, we shut the event down, we leave. And that is extremely important, because you definitely don't want to for us, we don't want to be in a situation where, okay, we're in Denver and we're following all these rules, and then we go to some other city and we're completely no mask, people are mask starting, this whole thing. It negatively affects us, and if it becomes a super spreader event, then we were part of that, and we don't want to have any part of that.
Lonnie, I want to add to that, because depending on your community, you need to know what the regulations are. And in fact, there is in our city of Denver, if one of your vendors is not in compliance and the Department of Health inspects your event, you're responsible to pay the fine. That is the event organizer, one that holds the permit, not your vendor. So it's a horrible reality. I think it's a bad rule, by the way. I'm hopeful that we're going to be working with government to change that, because I think it should be on the vendor. But what Lonnie said, I don't want to understate it. If you're not in compliance because of one of your vendors, you're the one that's going to get hit with a fine, and you're the one that's going to get the bad mark against your name. So I just absolutely encourage you to do that. What Lonnie just said, have an agreement that is crystal clear with your vendors and your suppliers.
Yeah, and we'll share all that too. I want to give you guys an example of what a COVID mitigation plan looks like. When you look at the link that I think Michelle already put out there that shows the guidelines that was done by Creigh and Andrea and a lot of us with input on the Colorado Running and Walking Alliance. We actually haven't modified it yet for the new restrictions. So some of the numbers have changed in it, but it gives you a really good thorough view of everything. And again, like Creigh said, some of the things that we've done in practice, we've learned based on the size of your event. Where we haven't had to have, we've still kept things safe, and it's very safe infrastructure wise, but sometimes we've gone potentially, depending upon the size of the event, it could be a little overboard, and you may not need to do all those things. And again, those are things, all this stuff can certainly be overwhelming, and it is a lot of work, but we've been doing this in our sleep, dreaming about it, a lot of times in nightmarish scenarios, but it's not the things we want to be dreaming about and looking forward to, but it's a reality, and safety is our number one priority. And so we've gotten really good at writing these plans, and we're there to help. So the general guideline as I scroll through this is usually we start off with a general overview, which talks about what capacities there are, what we're doing to keep things safe. A lot of times with events right now, there's no race day registration at all. Trying to create, think about your events, all the touch points that you can take away. No refreshments on the course at all. So water stations, if you have a longer event, that obviously isn't safety-wise doable, but you need to think about, you're probably not doing open water cups. You probably have closed water bottles that you're doing, which is going to add some expense and obviously a bit more trash-wise, but the safety important is very important. You would have as an example, you'd have a volunteer or a staff person, more likely, that's in PPE with gloves on, setting those out. They could either be handing them to the person, or what we sometimes have done is spread them out on a table. They grab it, they're only touching the one, they're off out of the way, so that you minimize any type of touch points. This is definitely a thing, staggered starts. They are going to be here for, I think, probably most of 2021, even if we're allowed to have larger numbers and larger gatherings. Staggered starts, where they're going to be brought in to corrals, almost think of it like waves, but in these waves, people are socially distanced. And we don't start everybody, for example, right now with Rudolph Rambo, we were allowed to bring in, we brought in 25, we could have 75 per hour, but we didn't start 75 all at once. We lined them up in smaller groups into a chute. The chute had 2 lanes, depending upon the size of your start line, that can look different on how many lanes, but we had 2 lanes with a median in the middle that kept them 6 feet apart. And then each spot we had, like Creigh said, we marked where people had to stand. The first 2 people, it was all time trial start. We started the first 2 people, then everybody moved up 1 spot, walking, stopped, then we told the next group when to go. Now it seems like that could take a really long time. I can tell you we could get through 75 people in less than a minute and a half. So it doesn't add that much more to your start time. But then we did, essentially what ends up happening is we have mini events. We had an 8 o'clock start, an 8:30 start, a 9 start, all the way up to a last starting at 11:30. So it does make for a long day, but it is very rewarding to be able to have the event, to be able to bring in some income for the charities and for ourselves or whatever the community, and it does something good for the community. And again, those are things that you have to start with, but know that staggered starts are going to be there, and you're going to have to think about those things, depending upon, again, what the guideline, what the county says, what your numbers are, and so forth. But we're not going to see shoulder to shoulder mass starts I will be surprised if we see them at all in 2021. Maybe we will by fall to some extent, but I think we're going to see a lot of these staggered starts. We talk about in our program, so this is what is going to permitting so that they know exactly what we're doing. And it's a guideline for us too. What we're doing pre-event for participant registration, what our vendors, staff, and volunteers must do, that we're really focusing on advanced packet pickup and encouraging people to do that. We have allowed people to pick up event day, but we strongly encourage them to do an advanced packet pickup. And we tell people they are not allowed to show up the event any earlier than about 30 to 40 minutes prior to their start time. If they show up any earlier than that, they don't get their packet. It's simple as that, because we don't want that. And then this was actually Rudolph Rambo, but you can see that we spell out exactly how we're making this look, the whole plan, so that it's there for permitting. Same thing with our finish line. One of the things that we learned with a finish line is obviously people come through. For Colorado, and this is again different in some states require you, or counties require you to have a mask on the whole time you're doing the activity. In Colorado, we've been fortunate enough, and we believe it is safe because we have everyone so spaced out that they're really never coming in close proximity to each other. Obviously, if they're passing somebody or something, we tell them to do it at a safe distance. Or if they feel more comfortable, pull up their mask. And of course, people can certainly wear a mask if they want to, but they have to wear a mask until they start. Once they start, they can drop the mask. When they get to the finish line, we allow them a recovery zone. Now in that recovery zone, they're not standing around catching their breath. They have to walk through, keeping themselves socially distanced. And then by the end of it, they need to have their mask on. And I bet I know what Creigh's going to talk about, the most important position.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that are really important. And Lonnie and I mean, it was so interesting to talk about this back when we're getting this all together. Your finish line announcer also has to know everything, has to be familiar with the plan. And there's a COVID-19, independent of all your other positions, you have a COVID-19, I would call it an officer, but manager, who that person is assigned the task of looking over the entire event and walking around and checking to make sure people are compliant. Not as a bad person, as a really good person, because what we discovered, runners, of course, when they're finishing, and walkers, they're coming in, it's like slow motion. One, okay, there's another one. There's another one. And it's just a very different feel to the finish line. But they have to, that announcer has to be looking over their shoulder, not just at the people finishing, but what's happening after they finish, and gently but specifically reminding them to keep moving, don't gather, on and on and on. And when you do that, if you have those two people, the start and the finish and the COVID-19 manager, all kind of overseeing the event, you're going to have a much safer event, and it'll still be a lot of fun for everybody.
Yeah, Cregh's exactly right. Having that compliance manager, and a lot of times we have, with us at the start line, we're watching that, and me as announcing a lot of the events and stuff, and Creigh too. We look at those things and kind of serve as that part there, and have staff respond appropriately. We have at our finish line, what we found out works really well is, and again, some of this is scalable based on how large your event is going to be. And you see all my little emoji people on here right now. I can tell you with the Welcome Back Denver, we had 700 registrants. At Rudolph Ramble, we had nearly 600. Your finish line will never look that busy, which it looks spread out there. You are lucky if you see 2 or 3 people in there within a few minutes type thing. I mean, it is crickets coming in. The way we spread people out, you get one person in, they get their stuff. They're pretty much gone out of the area before your next person even comes in. Occasionally you'll have a couple people together, but it is never, hardly ever look this busy as you see that it looks like here. But this recovery zone, we originally proposed 50 feet. We found out from Welcome Back Denver that was too short. Some people were running very heavy through that area, so we extended to 100 feet. And we allow them kind of in this area. We usually have our compliance officer kind of at the end here. We have them with masks and gloves on, and they're holding a deal of masks. Because you know what, it does happen. It doesn't happen a lot, but some people have their mask and they put it in their pocket. When they run, it falls out. They don't have one. So we have an extra mask available for them to make sure they're compliant. And they actually just stand there with a sign, and it says, reminder, masks must be worn. And people were extremely compliant. So they don't have to get confrontational. They don't have to, sometimes they'll remind people, but them seeing that visual person there and stuff like that gets them compliant. So we give them that recovery zone to make sure by the end of it, they're in their mask, and then we split them. Again, depends, this is scalable based on, getting their medal, the refreshments. All the refreshments or goodie bags were already prepackaged or laid out so that they could grab, but never had, we minimized that contact point. And again, I want to be sensitive to time. And then we talk about what we do. This is all event day stuff. We talk about the vendors, portable restrooms, things you never really think about. It's interesting with Welcome Back Denver, Creigh built this plan where we had different pods, groups of porta potties that we used for each start hour, if you will. And once that start hour was over, we closed them and then opened up the next set of pods so that we kept them as clean as possible. What we found out is, at least with a general 5K, where it always seems like the bathroom lines are heavily lined up, and now that people still are going to the bathroom, people generally don't want to, let's face it, porta potties are not fun to go into anyway under normal circumstances. So we found out their use is probably about 50% less, if not more, than typical. So with Rudolph Ramble, instead of having these pods, we just had our normal number that we would have. But what we did is we would ensure that we would look at, occasionally check them to make sure that they still seem clean and sanitary. If they weren't, we'd lock them up. So that way, and that's worked out completely fine. And then, really important thing too is timing your event. Besides giving people time is so critically important, because you have data of who was at the event, and if by any chance there happens to be someone that is diagnosed with it, and the state or your county Department of Health has to do contact tracing, you have the information to give them of who they were in close proximity during that time frame. So if your event didn't do this and you had 500 people at your event, guess what? Contact tracing gets very complicated, because they're going to have to contact every single person at that event. If you have your timing data and we can say, well, that person who was infected started at 8:03, they were around the people that they started somewhat close within a 10-minute time frame, between 8 o'clock and 8:10 were these 15 people. Well, that just reduced their work from 500 people to contact to 15 people to contact trace.
Yeah, and yeah, it's contact tracing is what we're talking about. And that was one of the things that Lonnie and I had to discuss because he knew so much about timing. I didn't know exactly how we would figure that out. And he said, because that's why you can't have an untimed event. You will never know unless you're writing down bib numbers or something. You'll never know. You can't figure out who was in that group. But with a good timing company at the start and the finish, you know exactly who was in that group. And so that, I'm glad you brought that up. That is so important because the government loved the fact that Lonnie could do that and other timing companies could do that. So that is critical to your success.
So then this is an example of a social contract. Again, we'll send you all these examples. I want to be sensitive of time, especially because we want to hear from Dave and Scott. But I'm going to stop share. I'm going to see if we have any questions that we can, a quick little funny anecdote here. Michelle just reminded me that I have an R in my contract. I have the hardest time saying contact tracing for some reason. So apparently I even spell that out when I write the social contract for the contact tracing component. But we'll welcome Dave and Scott to talk about the pledging platform that they have and some unique ways to look at fundraising for 2021 in their events.